Memory. It is the basis on which we make decisions and how we learn. It has also enabled us to survive for millennia. However, it is quite malleable. It can be altered, reshaped, repressed, and even lost. That memories are lost is something that people take for granted. However, most people are not consciously aware of the ways in which our memories are shaped and reshaped. Let's have a closer look at the ways in which memory can be distorted. Arguably, memory can be influenced in so many ways because of its very nature, because the quality of memories seems to deteriorate over time. Look at some of the ways that memory is distorted, and note that this list is incomplete. Observe that memories can be distorted through elements of our consciousness, such as a state of fatigue, factors in our environment, as with false recognition, where we see something similar to something we recognize, but think we recognize the object we see instead, and through conscious or subconscious effort on the part of the rememberer, as with selective memory. There are several other influences on memory as well, with particularly significant impact on us. Choice supportive bias. Retroactively describing choices in a positive manner or distorting memory to make them seem better than they were. In the Mather-Johnson study, this phenomenon was shown to increase with age. Subjects were given several two-option choices. A choice between two houses, two potential job candidates, two different airline flights, or two potential blind dates. Then they were either asked to review how they felt about their choices, to talk about the details of each choice, or to perform an unrelated task. After a delay, participants took a similar test that included a mix of old and new features from the original choice scenarios presented. Participants rated old features even more positively than before. Additionally, with increase in age came an increase in rating. This was especially true for older patients and for young people who were asked in the first round of tests to discuss how they felt about their choices. Why does it happen? A memory is constructed and then reconstructed when the rememberer experiences cues similar to those they experienced when the memory was first formed. However, a memory can never be perfectly reconstructed, as some of the information is lost over time. This may contribute to bias on the part of the rememberer, who may come to believe that in selecting one choice over the other, the choice must have had inherently greater merit. Additionally, where stereotypes are concerned, it is less cognitively demanding to simply dismiss the stereotype and to attribute more positive qualities to the non-stereotype. Lastly, it is possible that choice supportive bias evolved as a coping mechanism that humans use to rationalize their actions, to make them seem more appropriate or amenable than they really are, which makes sense because of the human tendency to rationalize. This is similar to a different cognitive bias known as hindsight bias, in which the rememberer claims to have known something all along. The major difference between the two is that hindsight bias concerns facts rather than feelings. For example, in the Baith-Fishoff study, participants were asked to assess the chances of several possible outcomes of Richard Nixon's visit to China and Russia. After his return, participants were asked to recall the probabilities they estimated, and the probabilities for outcomes that actually occurred were overestimated. Other experiments have shown that this can happen whether the scenario being discussed is hypothetical or real. Hindsight bias can happen because of exposure to new information or the desire to make oneself seem more intelligent. While the previous types of cognitive distortion seem rather commonplace, false memory syndrome is an entirely different story. False memory syndrome is when a patient develops a memory of something that never actually happened. It can be more than that, however. Consider the study conducted by Elizabeth Loftus, in which she met with the parents of individual subjects to learn about what a typical family shopping trip was like for them. Based on that narrative, Loftus concocted a false narrative of a time that the subject was lost in a shopping mall. Initially, the narrative was met with some skepticism, but when the parent confirmed details, the subject would tend to accept it as real. Not only that, but on being asked to recall details of the memory, They would recite the narrative and embellish it with details of their own. In other trials, the false narrative would be presented, and then sometime later, an actual event would be presented, and the subject would have to select the real one. Almost 25% were unable to do so. Are these results plausible? I think so. Although I would think that people would be able to distinguish between what happened to them and what did not, because of the way our memories are reconstructed, based on cues. If similar stories utilize similar cues, it may be difficult to distinguish between which is real and which is not. What other factors contribute to false memory syndrome? A desire to conform? A fear of challenging an authority figure? Does it happen because of the incorporation of new information? Is it facilitated by the decay of memory? The exact reasons as far as why this phenomenon occurs have not been pinned down, but it is important for us to care. Why? Because false memories distort our personal narrative. They can alter our senses of self and our identities from what they once were. In turn, false memories can alter how we relate to others. If nothing else, false memories can have legal implications. If someone attests in court to something that never happened, innocent people could be condemned, and criminals could walk free. These distortions of memory can impact our perception of reality and what we make of information about the world around us, because memory is an instrument of learning that helps us to make decisions. It influences our behavior and can be used to influence the behavior of others. That memory can change and deteriorate in so many ways should lead us to question how we can be certain that we know what we know. Our memories are probably not as precise as we think. Maybe some of our memories are false and do not actually belong to us. That is a lot to think about, but now consider what happens when memory is erased altogether. Memory disorders cause permanent loss of a person's memories and permanent failure to form new memories. Such memory disorders can be caused in all sorts of ways. A few of them are physical trauma, such as a blow to the head, psychological trauma, as in post-traumatic stress disorder, aging, diseases, as with Alzheimer's, and genetics, as with Huntington's disorder. Additionally, a few special cases will be considered. Do not conflate these with attention disorders, where the subject's memory works, but because they are unable to focus, they often do not remember what they are supposed to. One interesting class of disorder is agnosia, where the subject is unable to recognize certain objects, people, or sounds, for example. Agnosia can involve any of the senses, but what is really interesting about this disorder is that the senses in question function perfectly fine otherwise, and in addition, the subject's memory is still perfectly intact. Then there is Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, which is the combined manifestation of Wernicke's encephalopathy and Korsakoff's psychosis, which is the main concern here. People with Korsakoff's psychosis suffer from both retrograde and anterograde amnesia, false memory syndrome, and hallucinations. What is interesting about this disorder is that it is caused by a thiamine deficiency, meaning that in the long term, malnutrition can have a strongly negative influence on our ability to remember. Last and most interesting of all is hyperthermestic disorder. Unlike the previous memory disorders, which all involve the inability to remember, this disorder involves the inability to forget. Subjects are able to recall autobiographical details with exceptional accuracy, down to what they had for breakfast 10 years ago today. However, people with hyperthermestic disorder pay a price, and that is that their inability to forget gives them a propensity to dwell in the past, which can weigh heavily upon their minds, leading to serious psychological consequences such as depression. Most memory disorders irreversibly damage a person's memory and their ability to form new memories. They restrict their ability to learn and to interact with their environment, and therefore leave people with a very restricted basis on which to judge reality. They also raise a number of interesting questions. How can parts of our senses be damaged while others remain intact? Given all the ways that memories and the capacity to remember can be damaged or destroyed, might we one day gain the capacity to remove some or all of a person's memories, a la Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind? If we can destroy them, can we restore them, or at least stop the process that causes them to deteriorate? Given hyperthymetic disorder, maybe with a lot of research, we might gain the capacity to stop people from forgetting altogether, though that may not be as desirable as we think. The answers lie in the form and functions of our brain, just waiting to be discovered.